I'm back again. Well, today is the greatest honor that I have, standing up in this podium and try to introduce someone who is my hero, someone who is really doesn't need an introduction. This person is a great author, has been written 4 books with his wife. I am sure most of you know this person is Kristof. But he is so wonderful. He has been changing the life of thousands and thousands of individuals all around the globe. And why he is in my hero, he has been changing the life of the thousands and thousands around the world. But with me, he has really changed the life of the Afghan people in Afghanistan. How did he change? Every time that he had opportunity, he wrote about Afghan Institute of Learning. He tweeted, he put in LinkedIn, he did many things. And every time that he mentioned something, do you know that our fund was like 20%, 10% rise up. And the reason is that I want to talk about it because here we go and we do very hard work. If we don't have an individual with the heart like him, it would be very tough to do the work that we are doing. The women of Afghanistan benefited from Kristof so much that there is no word for me to tell you. Thousands and thousands of dollars have been given to Afghan Institute of Learning through Kristof. And many, many orphans in Afghanistan. We have 2 orphanages. Each one has 400 students. We have street children we go in the street and pick them up who are working in the garbage and trying to eat from the garbage. And we bring them to our program and we give them education, we give them service, we give them room and board, and we help them to have a better life, healthier life. That is the help that he is giving to us. They are orphanage girls that they are in the age of 4 to 16. They have no mother, no father, and they are coming into our center. We give them a place to stay, we give them education, and they learn income generation, how to be self-sufficient. And this is the work that Kristof is doing. So it is a great honor, and it's wonderful for me to introduce to you this wonderful human being, and it is so great to present the MCC Generation Award to Kristof. Here is.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sakena. Well, thank you so much. And I've got to say that, you know, as a reporter who spent a lot of time in Afghanistan, that we tend to think that the most powerful weapon we have against the Taliban is our airstrikes or our drones. Not so. Our most powerful weapon is girls' education, brought to you by people like Sakena. And I've been so impressed talking to you earlier about some of your projects. I talked a little bit ago to Cheryl, my wife and partner in this effort, and was telling her about these efforts. She sends her regrets that she is not here. Our baby is now a high school senior, and you know, if we both traveled here together, our daughter would be celebrating the Day of the Girl by having the most amazing party in our house. So it seemed most prudent for me to be here on her own. But Cheryl and I have been traveling and encouraging people to engage in precisely the kind of things that all of you are doing, to try to bring about a bit of a difference. And, I think the backdrop for our new book is that there are so many people who would like to engage, to make a difference, but they don't know how, or the problems seem too vast, or they're worried about corruption or inefficiency. And those are real issues. Bringing about a difference is sometimes harder than it looks. But we do now have new tools, new platforms, new knowledge. And that is something that is really revolutionizing the business of making a difference. And one of the stories we tell is of a girl, which is appropriate on this day. So let me share it. It's of this girl, Rachel Beckwith, who was only 8 years old in this picture, and heard about the need for clean water. And so she wanted to see what she could do. She's only 8, but on Charity Water, which I'm sure you guys know. You guys know Charity Water? Yeah? So on Charity Water, she starts a birthday page, and she asks in lieu of birthday presents to have people donate for clean water in Ethiopia. And she sets her goal of $300. And then she's frankly a little bit bummed out when those gifts roll in, and she only raises $220. And then a little bit after her 9th birthday, her family's in a car accident. Everybody else is okay. She's critically injured. She's in the hospital. Friends, people in the community, people in her church want desperately to show some support for Rachel. They think of that birthday page on Charity Water. They go there and they begin to make donations for it. The total surges past her $300 goal. It surges past $1,000, past $10,000. And as she's lying there in the hospital bed in a coma, and her parents don't know whether she can understand or not, they're able to tell her that she set a new Charity Water birthday record by beating the goal that Justin Bieber had set, which is pretty amazing. Rachel would have been absolutely thrilled by that. But in the end, Rachel does not make it, and she dies there in that hospital. But people in the community continue to be moved by her example and to want to commemorate this incredible girl with a big heart. And word spreads, and the donations continue. And at the end of the day, her birthday page raises $1.2 million, enough for 30,000 people to get water. And, nothing can solve the pain of losing your 9-year-old child like that. Nothing. But her mom was able to go a year later to Ethiopia to see some of the wells that these gifts have been able to buy, and these markers that were put there. And in some sense, I think that the knowledge of the transformation she had brought to so many other people at least helped provide a certain structure and order and commemoration to an event that otherwise seems so just purely tragic and random. And I think that is indeed what trying to connect to a cause larger than ourselves does for all of us, that in a world that is sometimes chaotic and has all kinds of pressures on us, it does provide a sense of order and purpose and meaning whereby we can align our lives. And one of the differences that your generation has emphasized is that, in the past, I think our generation was about sort of writing a check or volunteering and firing it off in the abyss. And one of the things I really admire about your evidence is the emphasis on evidence that has been accumulating. We have much better sense now through randomized controlled trials, through careful studies about how you can have a difference. And for example, talking about girls' education, Anybody want to hazard a guess about what one of the most cost-effective ways of getting a marginal child in school is? I'm sure some of you know this. It has to do with a medicine that probably is in many of your houses, but that probably almost none of you have taken. Deworming. We don't think of deworming because we don't have intestinal parasites. In much of the world, kids do. If they do, they're more likely to be anemic, they're more likely to be sick, they're more likely to miss school. And Michael Kramer, an economist at Harvard, based on his research, estimated that to get the cost of getting one marginal child in school, that it's only 1% as expensive if you do it by deworming children. And so this evidence is really kind of transforming how we can have impact. But the challenge is not only to build evidence and to act on that, but maybe the starting point, I always think, is empathy. In this country, we often seem to have a real gap in empathy. And those who have made it sometimes blame the poor for being poor. Susan Fiske at Princeton University did brain scans of people who were successful while she was showing them images of people who were homeless or manifestly poor. And she found that those images were processed not as if they were people, but as if they were things. In this country, the richest 20% of Americans donate significantly less to charity as a percentage of incomes than the poorest 20%. And I don't think that's because the wealthiest are intrinsically less empathetic, less compassionate. I think it's because if you were affluent, you were able to wall yourself and insulate yourself from people in need. Well, if you were poor in America, then every day you were encountering people who were even needier than yourself, and so you respond. And so one of the things I really would encourage you to do is to reach out, and instead of pointing fingers, offer a helping hand. One of our favorite stories has to do with somebody who did just that. There was a African-American kid growing up in Arkansas named Ollie Neal. This is in the late 1950s. He was going to a segregated school. Brilliant kid, but also a troublemaker. And he was fired from his job for stealing from the store where he worked. He reduced the school librarian to tears. And one day he's cutting class, and he's in this school library run by Mrs. Grady, and he sees this novel on the shelf by an African-American author, Frank Yerby, and it's got a cover with this woman wearing this sort of risque top. Risque by 1957 standards, so she's probably incredibly thoroughly covered by today's standards. So he looks at it and he thinks he'd kind of like to read it, but he's embarrassed at the idea of checking out a book because he's a tough kid. And so he steals it. He just puts it under his jacket and walks out. Well, he reads it at home and he loves this book. And so he returns it a week later and he sees there's another book by Frank Yerby there. So he steals that one. And he reads it and then, eventually returns it and discovers that there's a third Frank Yerby book that he hadn't noticed before, so he steals that one. And this happens 4 times, and it really transforms his experience. He becomes a reader. He loves to read. He reads more fiction, more literary fiction, current events. He ends up going on to college, to law school, becomes one of Arkansas's first African-American lawyers, eventually a prosecutor and a judge. And here is Ollie Neal being sworn in as a judge in Arkansas. Isn't that cool? So at one of his school reunions, he's meeting up with Mrs. Grady, and he tells her, it's your little library that turned my life around, but I have to confess it's because I stole some of your books. And she says, well, I have a confession too. I saw you steal that first book. She had seen him steal it. She was about to confront him. She was angry. Why are you stealing a book when you could just check it out? And then she understood that he was ashamed to be seen with the book. So she let him steal it. And then that weekend, in hopes that he would like the first one, that weekend she drove 70 miles to Memphis to the used bookstores to see if she could find another book by Frank Yerby. The first bookstore didn't have it. She went to another. That didn't have it. At the 3rd or 4th bookstore, she found another Frank Yerby novel. She put it on the shelf, and when Ollie Neal stole that second book, she was thrilled. So she went back to Memphis, did the same thing, And again, he stole that one, and she did this 4 times. And she was able to transform his life by taking a risk on a kid who had made her cry, who was a tough kid, who didn't really maybe merit taking a risk on, but she did, and that just reverberated through so many more lives, because Ollie Neal has indeed dedicated his life to helping the disadvantaged. And I guess in the same way, I think any of us who've engaged in this kind of work have had our hearts broken at times. Helping people is harder than it looks, but sometimes you really can have an impact that just spreads out and ripples through so many other lives, and I hope you will engage in that. Now, one of the reasons we focus on these efforts to address inequality right here at home. And one of the messages from the research is that perhaps one reason why we haven't had more impact on poverty is that we don't begin early enough. This is a child we met here in West Virginia, 3 years old, and he couldn't speak because he hadn't had a hearing screening, and he was completely deaf in one ear and mostly deaf in the other. And this was a correctable hearing problem, but because nobody had noticed this, he wasn't getting any auditory stimulus for the first 3 years of his life. Save the Children finally did screen and caught the defect and fixed the hearing problem, but we don't know if he can ever fully recover. And it is so much easier to deal with a problem at the beginning of life than to deal with a troubled teenager or troubled adult later on. And yet so often, both in this country and abroad, we pick the high-hanging fruit and don't pick that low-hanging fruit. So I really encourage you to engage in that. One of the messages has to do with something that is kind of awkward to talk about, a parenting gap, if you will, that wealthy parents, professional parents, speak much more to their kids, read much more to their kids, and also are constantly engaging with their child more. And skeptics sometimes think, well, there's not much one can do about this, but there's actually abundant evidence that one can coach parents to do a better job, to talk more to their child, to read more to their child, give books to those homes that don't have any children's books at home. And these work both abroad and at home. Now I want to show you a video from Kenya. It has to do with the Day of the Girl.
Welcome.
So,
I have a dream that will never fail. Every mighty king was once a crying baby. Every great tree was once a tiny seed, and so is my dream. This journey seems so long, yet I will not waver. The path has stones all over, but I will not give up. Every day of my life is a page of my history. Every step that I take is a move to my glorious destiny. It's not where I am, but where I'm going that matters. Now listen. Listen carefully to the words of wisdom. Stop watching your dreams go down the drain. Fight, fearlessly, like a wounded lion. For it's not about who you are, but how you see yourself. So dream. Thank you.
that's the power of girls' education. That's a little clip from a documentary that will be on PBS relating to our new book, A Path Appears. And it underscores that this is a little school in the Kibera slum in Nairobi that is having this extraordinary effect on these girls. One thing that we always emphasize the impact that we have on others. And let me just leave you with the thought of the impact that we have also on ourselves. Sometimes I hear young people say, well, the first third of one's life should be spent studying, the next third making money, and the final third giving back. And if you do that, you are robbing yourself of one of the great sources of fulfillment in life for 2/3 of your life. One of the coolest things we did for our book was we had our brain scanned. This is Cheryl. And the pleasure centers of our brains are these areas like the nucleus accumbens that respond to eating fine food, to flirting, to sex, to kind of the most primal pleasures of life. And they also light up when you give. For about half of Americans, they also light up. They light up actually more when you give than when you get. And there was one quite remarkable study that looked at mortality rates for seniors. It found that for seniors who joined a church or religious organization, mortality rates fell by 29%. That if you exercised a couple of times a week, mortality rates fell by 30%. And if you volunteered or got engaged in some cause larger than yourself, your mortality rates fell by 44%. So, you know, and if you just volunteered for a religious running organization, you're immortal. Thank you all, and you guys will live forever.